My name is Johanna. Today is Monday, September 21st, 2020. Exactly 200 days ago, before it was mandatory, I made the decision for myself and my son, Fox, to voluntarily shelter in place. My husband, John, would exercise caution as he continued to work outside of the home and bring in whatever provisions we would need from the outside world. By the following weekend, schools would be closed, and John would be laid off from his job in the food industry because all of the restaurants were closed. Some people have marveled at my ability to stay a little bit ahead of the curve in pandemic preparedness. It's not really all that marvelous. When you live through a crisis or two, you learn a thing or two about how to adapt in a crisis. This was me 3 years ago on a super cool road trip from Seattle to LA with my sisters. By the time I flew home, I had weird lacerations all over the inside of my mouth. Too much red wine, I thought. By the time I celebrated my son's birthday a week later, I felt a little run down. 2 weeks after that, when I went to see my doctor, I could barely walk. I had a lump I could feel on my throat, and all of my joints were swollen. As my symptoms rapidly worsened, I spent the next 6 months at home, in bed, in baths, on the floor, in a chair, enduring what would be the first major flare of an extremely rare autoimmune disease. I was eventually diagnosed and treated for Takayasu's arteritis, a form of vasculitis that attacks the aorta and its main branches. This period of time prepared me for what life was like when your world gets teeny tiny small, for what it's like to shelter in place. And the disease that I manage now, with an impaired immune system and an aorta that might want to go kaput at any time, made me not want to take a single chance of contracting COVID-19. So what have I been doing during these 200 days when my doctor has cautioned me to take no risks with a 7-year-old, an unemployed spouse, our 3 cats, and as of 3 days ago, a puppy? As it turns out, a lot. Like many of you watching and listening, life has gotten at turns very small and then sometimes overwhelmingly full. There's been a ton of fear and joy and just coping sometimes. This is my time capsule from 200 days in. When we began sheltering, I had just returned home from the Southeastern Theater Conference in Louisville, Kentucky. I should back up and tell you what I do for a living. Hi, I am the Executive Artistic Director of the Women's Theater Festival. We're a small but growing theater organization that calls Raleigh home. Since I had just come home from the theater conference, I had a big bag of play scripts to read. It felt like a great way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and start an online play reading group. I could knock out some of these scripts and initiate something for my community to do in a scary time when we couldn't meet up. Let's read plays and talk about them online. How could we have known at that time that we were taking steps to help build infrastructure that we need for a long, long, long time to come? Who could have known during our very first time going live on Twitch what that was going to mean for us? So yeah, 200 days in, professionally, from the outside looking in, I've been killing it. I mobilized a team of folks spread out across the country Together, we shifted all of our programming into the virtual realm. It's only been 200 days, and we are on our fourth major project initiative. Maybe, no, definitely, because I began the move into my current role during that time 3 years ago, working from my bed. I already had a template for how theater could be a thing that could be managed and executed from our homes. And you might be hearing this and be thinking, that's crazy. That is a crazy thing to do. Turn a theater company into a full-blown live stream producing entity with 4 major projects in just 200 days. Yeah, it is. It is crazy and audacious and too much. But why? Why is a group of women doing too much and being crazy and being loud about it a bad thing? I've got this combo of ambition and desperation that makes me be so unyielding in this way. Living with TAC, that's the abbreviation for Takayasu's arteritis, and in COVID times, seems to be heightening my sense of I don't want to die before I achieve all that I've set out to achieve. And the threat of death by COVID is compounded for me. During the first few months, I read every piece about COVID that came out in the Atlantic. My fears about acquiring the virus went from the healthy and reasonable camp to the unhealthy and scary, when article after article describing the effects of the way COVID was attacking people's bodies was just like what TAC does. What if I got this and my body can't fight it? What if I go into a flare and then got COVID? How quickly or painfully or miserably would I die? My special brand of anxiety and intrusive thoughts were continually taking me down the path of imagining being placed on a ventilator or not being offered a ventilator because of my pre-existing conditions, and of dying painfully alone in a hospital room surrounded by no one. I want to live because I don't want to die. I want to live because I want to do more and be more in my field. I want to live because Fox needs me and I need him. We're 200 days in, and over 200,000 other Americans have died because of the virus. It's tough to stomach. 200,000 people who also had more to do and be, who also had children or partners or sisters or kitties or puppies that they weren't yet ready to leave behind. Now, maybe a good time to tell you. I've been working through a mental health crisis during the past 200 days. Maybe you already guessed as much. The pressures of working, parenting, cohabitating, and all of the other stuff I've mentioned so far, or that you can infer from your own experience of quarantining during a global pandemic, have taken a toll. The medication that kept the anxiety and depression at bay for the better part of 8 years lost its effectiveness. So my doctor helped me transition to something else. Have you ever done this? It's really scary to leap into the abyss of your own mind under the best of circumstances, and these 200 days cannot be categorized as the best of anything. The transition didn't go well. Remember how much I want to live? Yeah, the new meds implanted an insidious black hole of an intrusive thought into my brain. The entire time I was outwardly killing it this summer with my work, there was a voice in my head on constant repeat telling me, "You're no good." As much as I want to live forever, I would have done anything to make that voice stop. We went back to the drawing board with meds. If there's a magic pill, I haven't found it. I feel better, but there are still glitches. I still feel broken. Like if my brain were a computer, it still needs debugging, and there's some malware that just hasn't been removed yet. There's so much to be said for these 200 days. For simple pleasures, new rituals that interrupt the stretches of agonizing existential dread. For my little family, during the first phase of sheltering, we started doing nightly fire pit music parties. When spring changed to summer, we segued into night swimming music parties. We found new ways to be together and have done our best to give one another space. My husband mastered the art of pool maintenance and began writing a comic book. Our son taught himself to swim and learned everything he could about clouds, tornadoes, and the solar system. I worked and worked and worked and worked. I wonder what little rituals autumn in quarantine has for us. I turned 40 in quarantine, and my nephew turned 1. We had hoped to celebrate these big birthdays together, but my sister's livelihood depends on working farmers markets in South Carolina. My other sister had a ticket to fly to Raleigh for my birthday, but she canceled it. She's an intensive care nurse on the West Coast. Neither of my sisters wanted to be the one to kill me with COVID for my birthday. They did, however, send me wine and fancy charcuterie. A week from today, so by the time anyone sees this, my son will have turned 8 in quarantine. I know we are far from the only people experiencing or pushing pause on milestones during this period. Babies are being conceived and born in quarantine. Birthdays, marriages, first steps, retirements, meet cutes, anniversaries, and an entire election all happening in ways we never in our wildest dreams imagined they'd happen. Will Halloween in quarantine, and will Christmas in quarantine? Because while some folks are going back to work sites, back to school, on vacations, out to eat, running errands, I still haven't. It's been over 200 days since I've been in a grocery store, a coffee shop, a salon, a public park, to Target. Target, the place where I'd regularly recover my sanity by walking slowly, checking out every new item on the shelf while sipping a seasonally appropriate beverage. Target, I think I miss you the most. It's also been over 200 days since I've had that delicious feeling of dropping my son off at school and having 8 hours of peace and quiet, of driving away from the carpool line thinking, "Ha suckers, he's your problem for the next 8 hours." Over 200 days since I sat in a theater, since I hugged someone who's not a member of my household, since I handed my phone to someone and let them get their germs all over it. I'm in quarantine until the bitter end. Or until I get more comfortable with the risk of not living through it. My son can't go back to school. My husband can't do what he did the last time he was laid off and just take a job stocking shelves overnight to make ends meet. And they seem to be taking this all better than I am. Their FOMO is nothing compared to mine. I was the kind of gal who stayed at a party until the bitter end. Never wanted to find out about something on Monday morning. I wanted to be the one to tell the you should have been there story. One of my greatest fears right now is that my industry will go back to normal before it's safe for me to do so. That I'm going to miss out on opportunities like this one to create public art because the public spaces will open. But aren't I a part of the public? Don't I deserve to participate? Don't I have something valuable to contribute? When the first wave of the lockdown began to lift, we took to taking car rides. We went to the Lowe's Home Improvement Garden Center for some plants for Mother's Day. We thought, why not let Fox get a Happy Meal? Why not let him do one normal thing? And then going through the McDonald's drive-thru continued to be just about the only normal thing he could do. So over 200 days in, and we have amassed over 100 Happy Meal toys. I can measure my days in Happy Meal toys. 117. In leisurely trips through Target, 0. In prescription medications, currently 6. In cups of coffee prepared and drunk at home and not at Starbucks, Jubala, Lucky Tree, or any of my other favorite spots, 386. In funerals I've missed, one major one. My husband's grandmother died in her memory care facility after a long battle with dementia. Even though you can't read my text, you should know I put battle in quotation marks. I hate when people use battle in that context, like if you were stronger or smarter or better somehow, you could win. If you're marked for that kind of death or sickness or prolonged suffering, you just are. Most of us wake up winning the great cosmic lottery every day until one day. What happens when the reality of our lives changes so fast, so completely, that we don't even have a chance to grieve it properly? Other things we've had to grieve in the past 200 days include Black lives lost at the hands of police violence. Brianna. Say her name with me, please. Breonna Taylor shot dead in her own bed, in her own home. 2 days from now, we'll learn that the officers who shot her will not be indicted. 2 days ago, we learned Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed. We are grieving. We are grieving so hard. We are scared at what the future holds. The fires that rage, the air quality so poor that the tools designed to measure cannot function, the thick gray and orange clouds, that we need a second alphabet to name tropical storm systems, that ice shelves are melting and sea levels are rising, that over 200,000 people have died, and we can't even all agree that this is not a hoax. How do we put a container around this kind of grief? And we can't even put a finger on the scariest part. I'm a theater manager. My husband is a food salesman. 2 industries that have been decimated. His parents are our safety net. Him with a few heart attacks, her in kidney failure and dialysis, and then me with a broken immune system and scary arteries and a malfunctioning brain. We're 200 days in, and there's really no way out. Oh goodness, I can't leave you feeling hopeless, because That's not really how I feel. Let's make a deal. I'll count my blessings if you'll count yours. Because I am safe in my home. There are many, especially women and children right now, who are not. Because for now, I have enough. My family is fed. Our bills are paid. We are not in danger of going hungry or losing our home. But many in our community are. Because making pandemic theater from home is fun. And I'm getting a chance to work with old friends and people I admire from all across the country from the safety of our homes. Because I get to make art out of my fears and frustrations and grief. Because I see the signs that this major reckoning is going to take, that there's enough of us willing to say that back to normal isn't an option, that normal wasn't all that great for a lot of folks, and we refuse to let this moment be for nothing because we see the cracks in the foundation clearly, because those racist monuments are coming down, because a tide has turned. Because even if I can't gather with you right now, can't physically touch you, can't share air and space and break bread with you, I feel you with me, and I think you feel me with you. We are coalition building, even now, because we will not let their lives be in vain, because over 200,000 souls deserve to be remembered, because Black lives matter, because we have an election on the horizon and we can make our voices heard through our ballots, because we have a responsibility to the future generations, because we have these blessings to count. Hold this time capsule with me. One day we will look back at this point 200 days into one woman's quarantine during the COVID-19 pandemic. And even if it isn't even the lowest part of this experience, we will have so much progress to measure. I know we will.